Hello, good people. It's lovely to be back with you. We have finished discussing Hilaire Belloc's book, The Servile State, and we have discussed his thesis that capitalism will ultimately lead to socialism because unbridled capitalism just will abuse its power more and more until people demand socialist remedies. That seems to be what we see going on right now in our country. The other thesis that he had was that people cannot be politically free unless they are economically free. So let's see if we can succinctly sum up our situation, our problem. It seems to me that the problem is this. We have a political system in our democratic republic. We have a political system that is designed to limit political power. And I think it does so quite well because the system was designed really in a very genius way by men who fully understood that if given the opportunity to tyrannize others, men will do so. And so they put a lot of limits into the political power. The political power is limited by there being three branches of government: the executive, the judicial, the legislative. And the legislative power is limited by there being two houses, bicameral legislature, one based on the population of a state and the other where there are just two senators for each state. So this keeps the large states from tyrannizing the small states. And then the branches of government, the three branches of government, are constantly vying for power. We often see headlines that have to do with some conflict between the different branches of government. And that's a good thing. It's good that they're in conflict with one another because that means the checks and balances of our system are working. Then it's also limited, political power is also limited by the levels of government. So you have the lowest level of government, your local government, your township, your city, something like that. Then you have your county, your state, and then there's the federal government. And as we know, there are always conflicts between the upper and lower levels of government at every step. The lower levels constantly have to be asserting their prerogatives against the encroachment and tyranny that is always threatening them from the upper levels. That is always what happens. That's just the way it goes. And so someone who was appreciative of Catholic social teaching would be a very big proponent of states' rights over the federal government. They would be a big proponent of local rights and the rights of citizens in a local area to their determination over the state or the city over the county, things like that. In other words, that's that principle of subsidiarity, right? The lowest level, always government at the lowest level possible, and that the upper level is to serve the lower and is to justify itself by its existence, by its service to the lower level. Well then, what goes wrong with this when it comes to the economic sphere? The problem is that the same kinds of limits on power that we have in the political sphere do not exist in the economic sphere. So a person can accumulate a tremendous amount of economic power. A person or any other actor and entity like a corporation can accumulate enough economic power to then use that economic power politically. This completely undermines all of the checks and balances and restrictions on power that we have in our Constitution. So when there is an ability within an economy for economic players to gather to themselves almost unlimited power, then we can no longer preserve the freedoms of a democratic republic. G.K. Chesterton recognized that this problem of limits was at the heart of the issue. He said this, he said that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers were not in favor of property because they were not in favor of limits. They didn't just want their own land, they wanted other people's land. And he said also that it would be the destruction of property for the Duke of Sutherland to have all of the farms in one estate, just as it would be the destruction of marriage for him to have all the wives in one harem. So you see that limits proper limits have to be set upon property, upon what someone can accumulate or what a corporation can accumulate. And that's actually why the word property is related to the word proper. There is a proper limit to how much a person or any economic entity can accumulate, or there should be. Otherwise, they are going to take that economic power and they're going to turn it into political power to the detriment of the rest of us. Why is it that it's so hard for us to see this? It's because there's this mantra that we have all been taught, and we have heard it over and over again, and it just cycles around in our brain. It makes us think that if we start to criticize capitalism, we're headed right down the horrible road of socialism and communism. And I agree that socialism and communism are definitely problematic and dangerous to our freedom. But so is the unbridled capitalism that we have in our system right now. So what is this little mantra that we have in our heads? It's this. It goes like this. Free market capitalism, capitalist free market. Free market capitalism, capitalist free market. Makes us think that if we criticize capitalism, we're against a free market. And it ties the two together in a way that just makes no sense. Let me explain why. First of all, whether a market is free or not, it's got to have capital. If it doesn't have capital, it cannot function at all. So the centrally planned markets of Russia under the communist regime, the central planners, that wasn't an end of capitalism, just the fact that they didn't have a free market. Rather, what it meant is that they were centrally planning how the capital would be distributed and how it would be used, and in what kind of production it would be used. But you can't have a market at all unless you have some capital. And every single one of us has some capital, or we couldn't even live. I mean, capital is whatever you still have, left in your house after you have eaten a meal. If you still have any food left, you've got some capital. If you still have a roof over your head, you've got some capital. So you have to distinguish between capitalism and the free market. Now, if all markets require capital, even if a market is not free. But of course, we're really after having a free market. And one of the things that makes us think that our market is free is the fact that there are these entrepreneurs who really make it in our system. And there are people who really rise to great success and make a lot of money. And the fact that they're always held up and shown to be successes, and we may even know them or we see them in the society, makes us think, well, of course it must be a free market. I mean, he made it. It's like a kind of a game. It's like we've been put into a game where some people are going to be able to make it out. And so our bargain is, if some people can make it out, it's okay if a majority of people get crushed by the system just because some got to make it out. What kind of game do you really want to play in our economy? Do you want the chance of unlimited wealth so badly that it's okay with you that some portion of the population will be crushed? The working class is getting less and less of what they produce. It's true that some escape from the working class and make it into the ranks of the very wealthy, but where's our solidarity that we're supposed to have with everyone in our society? Bert Weinstein and Heather Heying have been talking about the way that the rent-seeking elites are hoarding well-being. Let me give you a real good example of how that is happening. Recently on the Peak Prosperity YouTube channel, there was an interview with someone who knows how the stock market works and the inner workings, the real technical workings with the computers in the background that make the trades. See, the way the stock market works is it's actually not being run by human beings anymore. It's being run with these algorithms and computers that make trades in like milliseconds. And so it's really out of the hands of human beings. And if you're just a human being who's trying to play in it, you're, you're way outclassed by these algorithms and the speed of these computers. But they had this this interview, but in the description of their video, they had this to say, and I thought this was really a great, succinct explanation of what has been going on since COVID-19 and the financial downturn due to the virus. So this is what they had to say. GDP falls 35%, the worst quarterly drop in the history of the U.S. economy, and the too big to fail banks make record revenues. Got that? Over 50 million Americans have lost their jobs as a result of the economic carnage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet the big banks are not only unscathed, but positively swimming in profits. We live in a system run by the banks, for the benefit of the banks. We, the public, are simply grist for its mill. After all, the U.S. Federal Reserve, which wields immense global power and influence as the controller of the world's reserve currency, is owned by its private member banks. Should we really be surprised how the banks always seem to come out on top? And while we frequently criticize Fed policy for enriching Wall Street at the expense of Main Street, the banks are also picking our pockets in other ways that the public is largely blind to. Then they talk about the guests that they had on in that particular episode and said, he exposes a whole world of hyper-fast technology operating in the markets that most regular investors are completely unaware of and vulnerable to. The key takeaway is to realize that the markets and the financial institutions operating them are casinos. They have engineered the system to slant the odds in their favor. If you invest your hard-earned capital without clearly understanding the risks in play, then you're the sucker at the poker table. Is this the game that you want to play? Is this the game you want our country to play? Just because you think you might claw your way up to the hoarder class, those who are hoarding the well-being that Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine talk about? Think about this. Jordan Peterson talked about the need to learn to play an iterated game. Remember when he talked about the hockey game and how you don't just want to win the one game, you want to win the whole series of games by being able to stay in the play. Think about how we do this with football. So at the end of a football season, the team with the worst record gets the first pick of the next season's draft picks, right? So you're constantly building up the teams that are doing the worst, and you're slightly handicapping the teams that have done the best. Why? Because we want the game to go on. We don't want it to get to the point where you have if the top teams got the first draft picks, they would just get better and better and better, and they would gradually annihilate and push completely out of the game all of the other teams. We don't do that in football because we like the game and we want to keep it going. So the question is, how can our economy be an iterated game where many can enter and we can keep as many players in it as possible? And the only way to do that is if there are limits placed upon how much wealth one person can accumulate, how much wealth one company can accumulate, how much property one person can have, because there is a limit that is, but when you go beyond it, you've gone beyond what is proper. It's no longer property because it's no longer proper. So these are really the things that we have to question and we have to talk about. How would we get to be able to do this? How can we have our economy be an iterated game? And that is what distributism is seeking to answer. Until we are together again, treat yourself as though you are someone you are responsible for helping, because you are responsible. So am I. And together we are making the world. Bye for now. Thanks so much for watching.